The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. Let's pack our wagon and head out west for these last two divisional previews before the 2024 season kicks off.
Yeah, we've got an exciting group of teams today. I mean, I like all four of them, but today we're going to touch on some fantasy advice. We've got a futures bet for later in the podcast, but let's get started with the team previews here.
And stick around until the end of the podcast because we've got Bob on later to talk about the college football win totals he sent out to clients earlier this week.
Yes, definitely stick around for Bob. That's some can't miss content there, but we're going to start here in San Francisco with the 49ers coming off of that 12-5 season. And remember, they got the 1 seed. They beat the Packers. They had that 24-7 comeback against the Lions, and then they lost in heartbreaking fashion to the Chiefs in overtime of the Super Bowl. So as of now, they've still got all their weapons intact and a win total set at 11.5.
Yeah, and let's start here by saying the 49ers were an absolute wagon last season. They rated nearly 9 points above average in market for basically the entire second half of the year. San Francisco had a plus 11.4 scoring margin. They covered their games by an average of 3.4 points. So they're not going to be that good again this season, but I still do have them as Super Bowl favorites heading into this year with a higher power rating than the Chiefs and obviously a weaker conference, and so thus easier chance to get to the Super Bowl as well. The 49ers were rated about 5 points better than average at the end of the 2022 season, and I think this team is going to be closer to that 2022 Niners team than they were last year when they were just tearing through the league.
All right, yeah, well, looking back at last year, Shanahan and defensive coordinator Steve Wilks did not see eye to eye, so they're going with Nick Sorensen to run the defense now, and I mean, he's been on the staff for the last couple seasons.
Yeah, so I think they're just going to, Shanahan and Wilks disagreed on when to blitz, when not to. I think Nick Sorensen is just going to do exactly what Shanahan wants to do, but he's going to have less talent. They lose a ton of depth in that front seven, most notably Dre Greenlaw, who is graded as a top 15 in coverage grade for linebackers each of the last 2 seasons. But remember, he tore his Achilles on that freak running onto the field play during the Super Bowl. They brought in Devondre Campbell to partner with Fred Warner until Greenlaw can come back from that Achilles. Campbell was all pro back in 2021. He hasn't been able to summon that level since then, but yeah, he's a capable player there to play next to Fred Warner.
Yeah, I mean, they also lose Chase Young, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Clelin Ferrell, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Randy Gregory. So that's 217 pressures out the door. That leaves just Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave as guys of return who finished top 8 in pressures on the team.
Yeah, and that's the real concern in this front seven, right? It's so many bodies on that defensive line, and we know San Francisco loves to send their defensive line in waves. They like to get new bodies onto the field, particularly on third down, so the guys are fresh to rush against offensive lines. Now, not just in pass rush, I'm also concerned about losing those bodies in rush defense. So you look at it, San Francisco's defense allowed 0.7 more yards per rush with Eric Armstead off the field last season. They bring in Malik Collins to replace Eric Armstead and Javon Kinlaw on the interior, but Collins isn't nearly the same run defender as those guys. He did finish 22nd in pass rushing efficiency, but you look at it, Eric Armstead finished 10th in pass rushing efficiency last year. So it's going to be a downgrade there on the interior. Then on the edge, they bring in Yetur Gross-Matos, but he's never had a season with more than 28 pressures. And they were really counting on former second-round pick Drake Jackson to make the leap and become one of those guys they can bring in waves. But now he's out for the season. So it's really just going to be up to Leonard Floyd to rush opposite Nick Bosa. And yeah, Floyd, he's fine. He's good enough to start in the league, but he ranked 49th in pressures last year. So he's not going to be a huge threat opposite Bosa.
Yeah, well, the good news for this defense is they will be getting back all-pro safety Talanoa Hufanga. So, I mean, that's going to be huge for him. He missed the back half of last season with a torn ACL.
Yeah, and the pass defense dropped off with Hufanga out last season. They also bring in Isaac Yiadom and Rock Ya-Sin to play second corner opposite Travarius Ward. And I think both of those guys are capable of playing that role after Ambry Thomas broke his forearm in the preseason.
All right, well, on the other side of the ball, as of now, we've got minimal changes. So what are you thinking about this offense?
I mean, this offense is going to be really, really good. Again, I got the number one in the NFL, and that's just the benefit of your quarterback, Brock Purdy, being the 56th on the team in cap hits. So, I mean, this unit is loaded. It's crazy. They're paying him just $1 million a year. And really the only change from last season is switching out guard Spencer Burford, who ranked third worst in pass blocking efficiency. And he got benched for John Feliciano down the backstretch of last season. They're going to start, looks like they're going to start rookie Dominic Pooney, who's been great so far in camp there. And I think that Pooney will be an upgrade on both what Burford and Feliciano gave them last year. At least it sounds like that from the beat reporters. So the 49ers ranked 23rd in pass blocking efficiency last year, which was the second worst they've ranked in the Kyle Shanahan era. And I think the offensive line, with another year of continuity and an improvement at the right guard position, is going to be even better this season.
All right, well, getting a deal done with Aiyuk is obviously paramount here, but how would that change if he does end up getting traded?
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Brandon Aiyuk was a top 5 receiver in the NFL last season. He was one of only 3 players to average more than 3 yards per route run, and he led the NFL in ESPN's receiver score. I would say he's worth at least a point to this offense, and currently I have the 49ers favored on a neutral if they were to play Kansas City, just like they were in the Super Bowl. But without Aiyuk, I think that could swing the other direction, and the Chiefs would become favorites when you're just looking at the top teams in the NFL.
Yeah, well, at least their other skill positions would keep them from completely falling off. I mean, you look at George Kittle, he led tight ends with 0.66 EPA per target. Then you have Debo, who rated 9th in EPA per target with wide receivers.
Yeah. I mean, they'd be fine. They'd still be a good offense without Aiyuk, but are they going to be the best offense in the league, or are they going to be borderline top 5 offense? That's really what you're looking at with this Aiyuk decision. I think, just reading the tea leaves, it does seem like they're going to get a deal done before the season starts, but who knows? By the time this podcast comes out, maybe he's in Pittsburgh or somewhere else. So we'll have to see on that. I mean, we've got Kyle Shanahan's scheme as the best in the league by our metrics. He helps his quarterback out so much. Brock Purdy was 0.31 EPA per play, better than average on screens last season. And he's just going to get so many answers from his play caller, not just on screens, but even against the blitz. The 49ers averaged a league high 0.43 EPA per play versus the blitz last year. So Shanahan does a ton to help his quarterback, and they would have plenty of skill position talent even if Aiyuk wasn't on the field.
Yeah, and this run game is an absolute killer. I mean, we had them ranked only behind Baltimore last year, according to our metrics, and Christian McCaffrey led the NFL with 5.6 yards per carry when Purdy was under center.
Yeah, and they can get into those heavy packages and get into that 21 personnel to get all-pro fullback Kyle Juszczyk onto the field. They did that last year at 5 times the league average rate, which really helps this run game. And they can pass out of those looks too, so defenses are hesitant to really load the box when they do that. So I think this is the best offense in the NFL, assuming that Brandon Aiyuk is a 49er this season.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next team. We've got the Los Angeles Rams coming off of that 10-7 season. And remember, they had a rough start. They were just 3-6. They were looking like they were on pace for their 6.5 win total, but this offense absolutely turned it around. I mean, they got healthier. Then they leaned on rookies, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, who hit in a big way. So they ended up winning 7 of 8, and then they would go on to lose to the Lions in the first round of the playoffs. But now we got a 2024 win total set at 8.5.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget now that the Rams were 27th in market priors heading into last season. It was expected to be maybe top 5 pick for the Rams. Yeah. But they surprised everybody. They ended up getting their power rating to league average heading into the playoffs. And Sean McVay and Raheem Morris were really able to make contributors out of late round draft picks to an extent we really haven't seen in the last decade. I mean, it wasn't just Kyron and Puka, but it was guys all across that offense and defense.
All right, well, let's start with the defense here because the elephant in the room for this Rams team is Aaron Donald's gone. So I don't know what they're going to do here. What did they do to replace him?
Well, you look at it, Donald added 0.63 wins above replacement in 2023. And I think it's possible the Rams can match this production in the aggregate with all the additions they made in the secondary. It's a real Moneyball Jason Giambi situation, that famous scene in Moneyball, because you look at the guys they added in the secondary. Darius Williams ranked 5th in forced incompletions last year in Jacksonville. Tre'Davious White has battled injuries the last 3 seasons, but he made All-Pro this 2 seasons prior, and he's still under 30 years old. So if he can stay healthy, he's probably going to be a pretty solid player. And then at safety, Cameron Curl is, a physical borderline top 10 safety in the NFL. So to replace Donald, each of those guys just needs to provide 0.2 wins above replacement or be about 0.4 points per game better than a replacement level player. Doesn't seem far-fetched that could happen for this defense, so they might be able to make up Donald in the aggregate.
Yeah, and another more direct move that they've really made to replace him was using their first and second round picks on Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, who dominated together at Florida State.
Yeah, and there is a chance that those guys could give you something out of the gates. We've seen Rams pass rushers hit earlier than expected, like Byron Young, Kobe Turner. So I think there's a chance that those guys could give you something. But we're always a little bit hesitant on rookies, giving you vastly above replacement level play. So this defense finished 26th in market last season. They lose a great coordinator in Raheem Morris and an all-time player in Aaron Donald. I think they could find a way to match Donald's production, but the market has this Rams defense currently rated average, which I think is just too much of a leap for me heading into the year.
All right, well, we talked about how this team got hot at the end of the year. I mean, their only loss after their bye week was overtime in Baltimore, and the Rams averaged 29.3 points per game after the bye, excluding that Week 18 game with Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and what really happened during the bye week was Sean McVay made a vital change to the offense. It started using pistol formation more, which blended their under center run concepts with Stafford's shotgun passing game. The Rams called 54% of their runs in the pistol as duo runs, and they jumped rushing for 4 yards per carry pre-bye to 4.5 yards per carry post-bye. And now they're getting even beefier up front to help with those duo runs. They are moving away from Coleman Shelton on the interior offensive line, and they signed Jonah Jackson. So they're going to be really dangerous in the run game this year with Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, spelling him. So when they can be dangerous as a run team, that really sets up the play action game. That really sets up passing deep, which is Stafford's strength. So I really like what they did in the back half of last season, and I think they're only going to get better with the addition of Jonah Jackson at guard.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next team. We've got the Seattle Seahawks coming off of that 9-8 season, and they got off to a solid 6-3 starts, but injuries started piling up, and the team dropped 5 of their last 8, and then they lost that tiebreaker to get into the playoffs. So looking at 2024, they've got a coaching change and a win total set at 7.5.
Yeah, and I see why they made the change at coach. I think it was probably Pete Carroll's time, but it's important to note that this team is different than all the other teams that switch staffs this offseason. Seattle has a ton of talent, and they're really not far away from competing right now. I mean, you look at Geno Smith is 17-15 in his last 2 seasons as the full-time starter, and this team finished last season rated 12th in market.
Yeah, so this staff's coming into a solid roster, and you love these play callers, don't you?
Yeah, I really think these are the 2 best play calling hires of this cycle. And understanding that our data shows that brand new coaching staffs underperform their roster talent by about a point just because, the guys might not have the personnel to fit their schemes yet. And guys like Mike McDonald have never been a head coach before. So in the past, we've seen brand new head coaches underperform. And you always have to be hesitant about that when you're looking to be high on a team with a brand new staff, but I'm cautiously optimistic that this will be an exception like we saw last year with the Colts and Texans, because I love Mike Macdonald and Ryan Grubb.
All right, well, let's start on the defensive side of the ball with new head coach Mike Macdonald is quickly becoming the Sean McVay of defense. I mean, the Titans, Dolphins, and Ravens will all be running a version with coaching that served under Mike Macdonald last year in Baltimore.
Yeah, and the Chargers, Jesse Minter, continued what Mike Macdonald did at Michigan. So there's a lot of guys running a version of his defense in the NFL this season, because he's shown to be able to be stout not only against weak teams in the NFL, like, what we saw with Jim Schwartz with the Browns last year, but Mike Macdonald was his Ravens defense was also number one against top 10 offenses last year. So he's got a very flexible multiple scheme that really relies on simulated pressures for pass rush. And the strength of that Ravens defense last season was the spine, with a great interior offensive lineman in Justin Matabuke, great linebackers, and great safety plays. So you look at it, the Seahawks are going to be able to match that interior group that Baltimore had last year, because the Seahawks already have Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, and Draymond Jones, and they had the 9th highest percentage of their pressures come from the interior last season, and now they've spent their first round pick on Byron Murphy. The edge rushers aren't as great, but those guys, Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu, are serviceable, and the hope is that they're going to benefit from McDonald's ability to scheme those guys free rushes. You remember, Jadeveon Clowney averaged just 45 pressures during his healthy seasons before teaming up with Mike Macdonald last year, and he got 71 pressures. So we could see a leap from Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu this year.
How's it looking in the back end with the secondary, though? I mean, they can't be as talented as Baltimore was, right?
No, they're not going to be. But guys like Devin Witherspoon, not exactly a like-for-like body type match as Kyle Hamilton, but both guys can play that role in the slot for McDonald's defense because they can cover well and they're not afraid to hit. Devin Witherspoon graded as the 9th best run defender by PFF, and he's also an effective blitzer. He was second among cornerbacks with 10 pressures. So he's a really versatile guy for McDonald to have in the slot there. And then Tariq Woolen will be in that Marlon Humphrey role, and they clearly like Julian Love at safety as a center fielder because they just extended him for 3 years, $36 million.
Yeah, it does look like linebacker production is going to be a little bit more of a question mark here with Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker. I mean, that's a clear downgrade from Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen.
For sure. And this is likely going to be one of the main reasons this Seahawks unit is not going to be an elite unit like McDonald had last year in Baltimore. I mean, going back to 2022, the Ravens allowed a 45% success rate before getting Roquan Smith that year, before making the trade. That was 27th in the NFL. After they brought in an elite linebacker, all-pro linebacker, they only allowed a 39% success rate. That was 5th in the NFL. So it's still up in the air whether McDonald's defense can be really, really good without, an elite linebacker in there. And they certainly don't have that in Seattle this season.
All right, well, switching over to the offense, I was kind of surprised to see the betting line is clearly implying that this is a below-average unit.
It is. I mean, the offense was expected to be 10th through 12th in market last August, and they finished 11th. So now the market's saying this is the 20th best offense. It's like, I don't know that they got significantly worse, unless people are really disrespecting Ryan Grubb. They did lose 2 starters on the interior offensive line. That would be the main reason that this unit could fall apart. They signed Connor Williams, but he's coming off a torn ACL, and then they signed Lincoln Tomlinson, but he ranked 8th worst in pass blocking efficiency on true sets last season in that terrible Jets offensive line.
Yeah, they did draft Christian Haynes in the 3rd round, but it looks like he's been unsuccessful in wrestling that job away from Anthony Bradford, which is probably not a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, Bradford graded as the 3rd worst pass blocking guard by PFF in 2023. So the interior line's a little bit shaky, but I expect the tackle production to be much better. Last year, with starters Charles Cross and Abe Lucas battling injuries, Seattle's tackles combined to surrender a 10% pressure rate. But the season before, when those guys were rookies, Seattle's tackles only allowed a 6% pressure rate. And I know that Abe Lucas is still working his way back, but they signed George Fant there. So I just can't imagine that Seattle's tackles are going to give up a 10% pressure rate again this season. So the interior line gets a little bit worse, but the tackles should be better.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that Abe Lucas remains on the PUP list while recovering from that knee surgery. So, like you just said, I mean, this is pointing towards George Fant likely starting week 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if the line can hold up, Gino is absolutely going to be slinging it under Ryan Grubb because he wants to take advantage of bunches and stacks to push the ball downfield. I mean, you look at the University of Washington's offense started last season on a record-breaking pace, averaging 9.3 yards per play in the first 4 games of the season when Michael Penix was in the game. So we take out garbage time on that. And that was against teams that would allow just 6.1 yards per play to an average offense. So huge production. But then they cooled down when wide receiver Jalen McMillan got injured. But the Huskies scored 71 points in the conference championship and national semifinal before running into that Michigan buzzsaw defense in the title game. So what I'm trying to say is McMillan gave them that underneath threat, which unlocks the verticality to this offense. They were so much better with Jalen McMillan on the field last season.
Okay, so we're going to see JSN probably in that McMillan role, and then you got DK and Tyler Lockett with Gino. I mean, they clearly have an elite vertical connection here. I mean, Gino has 56 completions on passes with 20 plus air yards during the last 2 seasons.
Right. Yeah. So DK and Tyler Lockett should be playing that the Jalen Polk Romadunze role in the offense. So it's all kind of a like for like fit. The real difference here is that Washington had an elite offensive line for Ryan Grubb last year, and we don't know if the Seattle's offensive line can get there. So that's really what this is going to come down to. But I would not be surprised if we end up this season and we've got a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense in Seattle. But, it's a first-time head coach, installing a new defensive system, offensive coordinator, switching from college to pro. So I'm going to start them around average on both sides of the ball. And for those at home, they profile pretty similarly to the Bears. So you kind of want to ask yourself, is Seattle or Chicago going to score more points this season? Is Seattle or Chicago's defense going to allow fewer points? That's going to kind of instruct you how you feel about these two teams, because I really think there's only one spot in the playoffs for either Seattle or Chicago.
Nice. I like that little comparison. That'll be a good one to keep an eye out for. But let's switch it over to our next team. We've got the Arizona Cardinals coming off that 4-13 season, and they had low expectations coming in. The roster didn't look good to start the year. I mean, this team was just 1-8 before Kyler came back, but he helped rattle off some wins and made this offense start clicking. But now, 2024, they've got a win total set at 7.5.
Yeah, and I want to start with the defense for the Cardinals because they've got an interesting scheme here with hardly any talent. So it's going to be a wild ride on this side of the ball in Arizona.
Yeah, Nick Rallis was the youngest defensive coordinator in the league, and he was definitely trying some stuff last year.
The Cardinals, 8th highest zone coverage rate because they just didn't have the dudes to play man. But he did a lot of funky things. He ended up rating 7th in our scheme uniqueness score. And there's that clip going around of CJ Stroud complimenting Rallis on his confusing pre-snap looks.
Yeah, unfortunately for Rallis, the Cardinals defense did not add any high-end or even really mid-tier players this offseason. And really the only one we've got circled is Sean Murphy-Bunting being a slight upgrade at corner over Antonio Hamilton.
Yeah, and one of Arizona's better pass rushers, B.J. Ojulari, tore his ACL. He's going to miss the season. So they did take Darius Robinson in the first round, so it'll be huge for them if he can give them decent production as a rookie. I'm not talking Will Anderson level, but maybe something like the Rams' Byron Young or the Bucs' Yaya Diaby last year. Now, the strength of this defense remains at safety, where the Cardinals have the 4th best tandem in the NFL, according to our metrics, with Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. However, this defense clearly has overall the worst talent in the league. But due to solid coaching, I've got them just slightly worse than every other defense in the NFL. So still 32nd, but there's not a massive gap because I respect what Rallis can do with this unit.
All right, well, shifting over to the offense. From week 10 onward, when Kyler Murray came back, the offense ranked ninth in EPA per play, and the Cardinals had the third highest success rate from an offense of 2023, which was week 17 against Philadelphia at 58.7%.
Yeah, I mean, they bullied the Eagles in that game,
Oh.
you remember, but they also lost starting left tackle DJ Humphries in that game to a torn ACL, and they didn't bring him back. They replaced him with Jonah Williams for this season, which is going to be a downgrade in my mind because Humphries ranked 14th in pass blocking efficiency on true sets, while Jonah Williams just ranked just 31st. And the Cardinals brought in Evan Brown to replace Elijah Wilkinson on the interior line, which is going to be an upgrade. Brown conceded a 5% pressure rate last year compared to Wilkinson's 9%. But overall, I think the line a little bit worse because Humphries is the gap between Humphries and Jonah Williams is larger than that interior line gap.
All right, well, what do you think about this receiver group after they bring in one of the best prospects in the last 5 years?
Yeah, and I understand the hype around top pick Marvin Harrison. I think he's going to be much better than a typical rookie, but you remember they also lose Hollywood Brown. So he's going to have to be one of the best receivers in the NFL to make a major, to be a half point better than what they already had in Marquise Brown. So I don't know that the receiver group is going to improve that much unless Marvin Harrison does something truly crazy, which, you got to leave the door open for that. So if this group makes a leap, in my mind, it's actually more likely to come from a guy like Michael Wilson, making a significant leap with another offseason under Drew Petzing, or maybe Trey McBride turns into a Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews level tight end. We certainly saw some great sparks from him last season.
So are we thinking this team could maybe sneak into the postseason as a wild card?
Well, there's reason for optimism with this team. I like both play callers, and I think Kyler is underrated at this point in his career. However, I think they're a year away. I think they just need more bodies on defense and a couple more pieces on the offensive line. So I could see this team being in the playoffs in 2025.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the fantasy corner, and who are you looking to target in this division?
I'm looking at Geno Smith, who's going quarterback 23 in Best Ball Mania on Underdog. He's going behind Baker Mayfield, which is a little bit crazy to me. Geno finished quarterback 10 in fantasy in 2022 when his offensive line was 23rd in pass blocking efficiency instead of fourth worst like they were last season. We talked earlier in the podcast how we do think that the tackle play in Seattle is going to get better. So I do not expect this pass blocking unit to be bottom 5 again. And we have Seattle's offense rated around the Falcons and Chargers in our priors heading into the season. So I think you should be going in the 140s around Justin Herbert and Kirk Cousins instead of pick 169, and especially since we think there's real upside with this offense in the downfield passing game under new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb.
I like that one. Well, we got one more thing, and that is a bet to end the podcast. So we're going to look at the Defensive Rookie of the Year market, and 4 of the last 5 Defensive Rookie of the Years have been edge rushers, and all of them had pedigree picked in the top 20.
Yeah, and so the 3 highest edge rushing picks this season were Laiatu Latu, Dallas Turner, and Jared Verse. And the Rams have a market power rating 1.5 points better than the Colts and 3 points better than the Vikings, meaning that Verse is likely going to get a lot more clear pass rushing situations with a lead than those other 2 guys. And Verse is also not going to need as much development. He's going to turn 24 halfway through this season, while another first-round edge rusher on a good team, Chop Robinson, is just 21 years old.
Yeah, and Jared Verse is already a known quantity by the media. I mean, he was a first-team All-American the last 2 years in college.
Yeah. And 9 was the average amount of sacks it took to win this award for those 4 edge rushers that won it in the last 5 years. I project the Los Angeles defense to get 40 sacks this season. So I think there's a decent chance Jared Verse gets there. And Jared Verse is listed at 9-1, while Latu and Turner are in the 4-1 range. I don't think Verse should be lower than those 2 guys to win this award. So I will take Jared Verse to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. All right, Wednesday afternoon, we've got Bob here to talk about a couple of the college football win totals he sent out to clients earlier this morning. Let's start with USC over 7.5 wins. What are you seeing with this team in their first season in the Big Ten?
Well, I think USC is underrated. There's a perception that losing number one NFL draft pick Caleb Williams is going to be more damaging to the offense than I think it will be. Williams is certainly talented, played at an elite level at both Oklahoma and USC under coach Lincoln Riley. Last season, Williams was at his best. He averaged 8 yards per pass play, facing a schedule of teams that would allow 5.5 yards per pass play to an average FBS quarterback. So plus 2.5 yards per pass play is seventh best in the nation last year. And of course, he adds a running element, 407 yards on the ground and 63 scrambles. So that adds to his value. Williams was a little worse in 2022, so he got better last year. He was plus 2.1 yards per pass play, compensated in 2022, and plus 1.5 yards per pass play rated as a freshman under Riley in Oklahoma. So he got better every year, and certainly he was an elite quarterback last year. However, Riley's offenses have been great regardless of the quarterback going back years, back to 2015 when he took over as the offense coordinator at Oklahoma a couple years before he became the head coach there. The only quarterback that was worse than Williams was Spencer Rattler, who Williams replaced as a freshman. And then Rattler went on to mediocre performances at South Carolina.
Yeah.
So what I'm kind of getting,
Baker were better.
Yeah. Oh, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray were about 1.5 yards per pass play better than Williams was last year. I mean, as a whole, two of the best ratings I've ever had in the history of doing my ratings, 25 plus years. Those two offenses were the best ever. And Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray have been mediocre at best in the NFL. I mean, they're not great quarterbacks. I'm not saying that Williams is not going to be a good NFL quarterback. I think he'll be fine. He's a good runner, and that adds to him. But he's probably more like Jalen Hurts, who was under Riley at Oklahoma. Hurts was another one of his quarterbacks that was better under Lincoln Riley's offense than Williams was last year. And Hurts has that running element. So I think he's probably more along the lines of a Jalen Hurts in the NFL than he is Baker Mayfield or Kyler Murray. But remember, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray both did not have success elsewhere before. They both played at Texas Tech, actually. Mike Murray was at A&M before coming to Oklahoma. I mean, Baker Mayfield was a starter for some time at Texas Tech, got replaced as a starter and went to Oklahoma, and then he was a Heisman Trophy winner. Kyler Murray had no success at all, couldn't crack the lineup. When he did play, he was terrible. Then he went to Oklahoma and became a Heisman Trophy winner. So what I'm saying is Lincoln Riley's offense makes everybody look great except for Spencer Rattler, who just wasn't good anywhere. He wasn't good at South Carolina either. Now, Williams is a good quarterback. He was, but relatively in a Lincoln Riley offense, he was not very good. He had last year, he was the second worst quarterback that Lincoln Riley has had. So I don't think replacing him from a passing standpoint is going to be a problem. And this year's quarterback, Miller Moss, started the bowl game last year and averaged 11.3 yards per pass play against a good Louisville defense in the Holiday Bowl. USC was a 7-point underdog in that game because they overestimated the value of Williams, and USC won 42-28 against a pretty good Louisville team. Now Moss, even before that game, had always done well when he'd come in, mop-up duty or whatever else. He's completed 74% of his passes for 10.6 yards per pass play and 79 career pass plays. That's a small sample. But the one time he got to step up was in the bowl game, and he lit it up, 11.3 yards per pass play. So I'm saying I think he'll be as good in the passing aspect of the game. The problem with USC's pass offense this year is not losing Williams. It's losing Taj Washington, the receiver. This guy was incredible. He averaged 18 yards per catch, but he caught about 77 or 78% of the passes thrown to him, 14.2 yards per target from a wide receiver as a number one option is ridiculously good. So I don't think Moss will be as good in the pass game as Williams was last year, simply because they're losing Washington, not because they don't have Williams. So I think USC's offense is still going to be very good. They'll still have good receivers. They just won't have Taj Washington. And Moss probably not going to be the runner that Williams was. So I do think The offense won't be as good. The running backs should be fine because the running backs have always been good in Riley's system. And the pass game will be probably more like Williams in year one at USC or his first year as a freshman at Oklahoma, which is still a very high level. So I think the offense is going to be really good. And I think it's been overdone that Williams has moved on because Moss can clearly throw the ball, and he was a high-rated prospect coming out of high school. The other part about USC, which I think makes them underrated, is the defense. Now they've been they've been terrible on defense recently, but they brought in crosstown rival to fill in the defensive coordinator spot, D'Anton Lynn, who was UCLA's defensive coordinator. UCLA had an elite defense last year, a top 10 rated defense last year in compensated yards per play allowed. And he comes over to USC where they have struggled defensively, to say the least. Last year, they were 0.1 yards per pass play better than an average FBS defense, which is not good for a Power 5 team. And now they have a legitimate defensive coordinator who's had success. They have better talent at USC than they had at UCLA. In fact, the talent rating on the Trojans' defensive personnel is 15th best in the country. They could end up being the 15th best defense in the country, but it's hard to make that leap from being about average to being 15th best in the country, regardless of who you're bringing in to be the defensive coordinator. But they have a lot of guys with experience, a lot of highly recruited guys that had talent. They brought in some transfers. I probably would peg them around the 40th. Conservatively, I have them 42nd best in my ratings defensively, and I think that's about as bad as they can be. I really think they're more likely to be in that 25th best defense range, and they could be as good as 15th best if they play up to their talent level. So I think the defense is going to be a lot better. The offense will fall off some because they don't have Taj Washington and because they don't have Williams running yards, but it's still going to be an elite offensive team. I just think USC is a very good team, much better on defense, won't fall off too much on offense. And let's see, there's 8 games. USC, I give it a 75% chance of winning. They have Utah State, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Maryland, Rutgers, Washington, Nebraska, UCLA, which is down this year. So that's six or 7 wins right there. It adds up to 6.7 wins if you add up all the probabilities of those 8 games. If they win 7 of those 8, which is probably more likely than winning 6 of the 8, then they just need to win 1 of the 4 toss-up games, which is LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, to get to 8 wins. If they only win 6 of the 8 games, they still have a pretty decent chance to win 2 more of those 4 toss-up games. So I think it's a really good bet to go over 7.5 wins. I predict 8.9 wins. Now, based on the history of 2,000 or so season win predictions and how my win prediction differs from the actual win total and how many of those went over and under, 8.9 wins, which is 1.4 wins higher than the total, is about a 64% chance to go over based on the historical performance of my win total projections. So 64% chance, that's a pretty good bet. The odds were minus 110 this morning. I'd say bet it up to 135, and I think you can still get that at some places. I think even up to minus 150, there's some value. I wouldn't want to lock up my money for the entire season for that kind of edge, but if you're interested in that, you don't mind locking up some of your money that long, then even up to minus 150, I still think there's value.
All right, well, let's shift it over to another team you like over 7.5 wins, Iowa State.
Yeah, I was favorable. I liked Iowa State a little bit more last year. I mean, they had later in the season, they had a freshman quarterback, Rocco Becht. Really not really sure what to expect from him. I didn't like the running backs that they had. But about mid-season, later in the season, they started giving a freshman running back, Abu Sama, more carries. And that really helped the run game. Becht proved to be a very efficient quarterback, especially for a freshman. It reminds me a lot of Brock Purdy, actually, in Brock Purdy's freshman year. Becht was 1.6 yards per pass play, better than an average quarterback. As a freshman last year, he averaged 7.9 yards per pass play against teams that would allow 6.3 to an average quarterback. And the improvement from freshman to sophomore season for a returning starter is traditionally the biggest improvement that a returning starter has. Right. So there is an argument that he can get much better, although I just have him being a little bit better because he was at such a high level for a freshman last year and the talent level of the receivers is not as high as some other freshmen historically that have played at that level. So I think he'll be just a little bit better than he was last year, but that's good enough because I think the running game is going to be better. The other two running backs who weren't very good transferred out. Saba's the man. He averaged 7.3 yards per rush last year, 614 yards on 84 runs, led the team with the third most carries on the team. He's not that good, 7.3 yards per run. He had 276 yards. Yeah. He had 276 yards on 16 carries in one game against Kansas State. And for those that were with me last year, you might remember I had a best bet on Iowa State in that game. And they had 500 and something total yards on 31 plays. I mean, they just big play. It was a complete blowout, which I was happy for. But it sort of skewed their averages a little bit. But his median rushing average, taking out that extremely good game and taking out his worst game, was still 6.0 yards per run. So I don't expect even maybe to be that good, but he'll certainly be much better taking carries from the other two running backs they had last year who averaged a combined 4.3 yards per run. So the running game is easily going to be better. Becht should be a little bit better in his second year. I mean, they have 10 returning starters on offense. They have all the offensive line back, all the wide receivers back. The running back is back. The only guy they're missing is the tight end, but they have a good tight end. They always have good tight ends. They run a 2 tight end offense, and 3 of the 4 in the 2 deep are back. So I think their offense is going to be very efficient again, and they're also explosive, which I like. Not only convert third downs and are efficient, but they have a high yards per catch is around 13.5 yards a catch. They have a big play running back. So I think their offense can be both efficient and explosive, which is a pretty good combination in college football, like an Oregon type of offense. Yeah. As far as the defense goes, Iowa State's always good on defense. They've had their defense coordinator, John Heacock, there for eight seasons now. 2 years ago, they ranked 6th in the nation in compensated yards per play allowed. Last year, they were 17th. Now, keep in mind that they were 6th and 17th the last 2 years in defensive yards per play, and they had an average of 4.5 returning starters those years. They have 9 returning starters this year. They have their top 6 tacklers back. And aside from their top 6 tacklers, their eighth tackler was an All-American free safety, Jeremiah Cooper, who was, he's an honorable mention All-American last year, and I think he's a preseason All-American on one of the teams, second or third team, coming into this year. So they have most of their best players back. They lost one cornerback, Tampa, to the NFL. I think it was a 6th round, maybe 6th, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round draft pick. But the defense should be in the top 10 this year. And combined with that offense, I just think they're going to be a very, very good team. Probably matching Brock Purdy's 9-3 team from 2020. There are 6 games on the schedule in which I have them as an 80% chance or more of winning. North Dakota, Arkansas State, Houston, Baylor, Texas Tech, and Cincy, all mediocre to bad teams. They should be able to win most of those games, if not all of them. There are 2 other games in which I have them as at least a 3-point favorite in. That's UCF and Kansas State, both at home. The toss-up game, the toss-up games are Iowa, at West Virginia, and at Kansas. They also have a game at Utah, which sort of falls into the toss-up game, although with Kansas, I have that more of a semi-likely win. I have Utah more of a semi-likely loss. But Iowa and West Virginia are certainly toss-up games, 50-50 games. So Iowa State's 81% likely to win at least 5 of the 6 games against the easy teams. And if they win five of those 6, they only need 3 more wins in their other 6 games with just Utah, in which I think they'll be an underdog. So I really think they're likely to go over 7.5 wins. I have 8, just like USC. I have 8.9 predicted wins for Iowa State. Gives them a 64% chance of going over 7.5. I laid minus 135 odds this morning. I think it's up to about minus 150 at most books. Some a little higher. I think up to minus 160 is still worth a bet. There's still some value higher than that, but I really wouldn't put my money, at work for that kind of lower margins at above 160. But you could probably still find minus 160 or better somewhere on that.
Well, and remember, we were just talking about this in one of my Kansas group texts, but that game at Kansas is going to be in Arrowhead this year because they're redoing the football stadium at Kansas, and a ton of Iowa State fans are going to travel down this year. So it could be more of a neutral site game.
Yes, that's factored in. As you know, Iowa State fans are extremely good travelers for the Big 12 tournament in basketball every year. Their spread record in neutral site games in the basketball is extremely good because they travel so well. And like you said, there will be a lot of people going to that game. So I think I gave it half a point to a point of home court edge or home field edge instead of the normal, 2.4, 2.3 points. So I did lower it a little bit. I didn't make it quite a neutral game, but it might just be a neutral game actually.
Yeah. We're hoping not in our KU football circles. But all right, you can go to drbobsports.com to sign up for all of our college football and NFL bets this season. And we will see you guys next week on the podcast for the AFC West preview.